Hey guys, Chris here. Today we have a story about a couple who lives in Wyoming near the Dubois Badlands. And there they have an experience that for them is unimaginable. That's next. All right, you guys, I am in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. It is late afternoon. It's a pretty hot day, so I got some cover in these stand of small trees here. Small ponderosa pine, I believe. And for today's beer, we have, this is the Wild Horse Amber Ale out of the Great Basin Brewing Company. That is out of Reno, Nevada. And what's cool is I see wild horses on my way up to Reno in the next valley up on a regular basis. There's a lot of wild horses around here and throughout northern Nevada. There it is. You can see the nice amber going on there. Yeah. Wow, almost a buttery finish to it. Really smooth. Definitely an amber ale. No bitterness at all. Really easy to drink. And it's 5.0 ABV on that. That's a very good beer. Wild Horse Amber Ale. Cheers. So if you've ever been to Wyoming, it's a very diverse state. It's a very interesting state. It's the least populated state in the entire country. The Rockies obviously go through and sweep through the state from the northwest and central part of the state and sweep all the way down to Colorado. There's deserts in the southwest, grasslands in the eastern part of the state adjacent to Nebraska, South Dakota, small basins, isolated mountain ranges, and badlands. Badlands are very interesting. They are usually in a rain shadow and they create these desert landscapes with towering red rock formations, different soils, hills, tabletops, mesas, canyons, and they're called Badlands because the Native American people, Lakota, Shoshone, call them Badlands for travel. Really difficult to travel through them because there's like a maze of these formations and hills and cliffs, and many of the canyons are dead ends, and the mesas drop off into sheer cliffs, and there's just a maze of hills and confusion. And when it rains, the soil can turn into a thick mud called gumbo, and it gets on horse hooves and feet and tires, and it's really bad lands for travel. And there's one such area in the central part of the state near Dubois, Wyoming. And this is where our story takes place. And Dubois, Wyoming is located north of the Wind River Range, south of the Absarokas, which are adjacent to Yellowstone. And so the Wind River Range sweeps down from the north and west to the southeast, and then north of there is Dubois, and then north of there is the Absaroka Range. And then just east of town is this fairly vast Badlands area, and this is where Kelly liked to take her 3 dogs for walks on a regular basis. She just loved these Badlands, and these Badlands are beautiful, they're desolate, and they're haunting. Now, Kelly was married to Dan, and Dan was a fly fishing guide. They both lived in Dubois, Wyoming. Dan loved his job. He would take clients up into the Wind River Range and down to the Wind River itself. And Kelly, she worked in town, but she had a routine with her 3 dogs. Daisy, Rowdy, and Sweet Pea. She would load them up in their Ford F-150 truck and take them east of town and go off the road and follow this dirt road and go out into the Dubois Badlands. She just loved it. She loved the freedom of it. She had this routine, and she would go out there 3, 4, 5 times a week with her dogs. She would take the truck and go on the same road and go up on this little hilltop, kind of swept down on either side, turn around, kind of back in, park the truck, and let the dogs out and let them run. They just love to run out there. And she had this like forever view that she called it, where she could look out over the Badlands and just see it just go on and on and on. And she just loved that. And she hardly saw people out there. And so this was her routine. On this particular day in 1994, she was out there with her 3 dogs, came over the top of this hill, was down at the bottom of this hill, working her way up the next hill. And right at this time, Sweet Pea and Rowdy took off up the hill and disappeared, which is very normal for them, very common for them. And she's walking along with Daisy, the dog Daisy that would stay by her side all the time. Daisy stopped and started growling. Kind of unusual for Daisy. Kelly always paid attention whenever her dogs gave these warnings like this. One time, Daisy warned her about a mountain lion, and she always paid attention to when they scented something or picked something up. And Daisy's standing there growling with her back up like this, looking up the hill where Sweet Pea and Rowdy had just gone. 20 seconds later, Sweet Pea and Rowdy came running over the crest of the hill, coming down the hill as fast as they could, with their tails between their legs, their ears back, and they were whimpering. And they ran right up to Kelly. And like I said, she always listened to her dogs. So she said, okay, let's go. And she turned around, and she was going to head back up this hill to the truck. Right at that moment, Daisy was still growling. She was still looking back in the direction that the other 2 dogs had come from. And then finally she turned and started walking with them. And then the next moment, Sweet Pea and Rowdy took off as fast as they could, and they ran up the hill and were heading back for the truck. Daisy stayed with Kelly, was still growling, and Kelly was feeling really creeped out. She was looking over her shoulder and just wondering what the heck is going on. She'd never seen her dogs act like this before, not all at once. It was usually just a bark or a growl, but it didn't go on like this. And the other 2 dogs were really scared. She could tell that Daisy was scared too, but she was trying to be tough for her, it felt like. She gets to the top of the hill. She can see the other 2 dogs down below, and Daisy took all she had to make sure she stayed with Kelly. She walked back to the truck, let him in, and they took off. Went back home. She came out the next day, parked in the same spot, opened the door. This time, the dogs wouldn't get out of the truck. She backed up about 10 feet, kind of put her arms out and said, come on guys, let's go. Let's do our thing. They didn't budge. Kelly looked around. She was listening. She didn't hear anything. And she thought about the previous day, and she thought maybe there was somebody out there that was shooting guns, but she didn't hear anything. Maybe there was some wildlife out there that had spooked the dogs. So she went home and she told her husband, Dan, about this. And he said, you need to stay away from the Badlands. There's something out there. She said, well, no, I'm okay. And he goes, no, you don't. You're by yourself. And she said, no, I have the 3 dogs. And so they kind of debated about this. And she finally gave in. And she said, okay, I'll take the dogs to the other side of town. She took them out there. There's more of these open fields. And they had a nice time, a nice walk. But Kelly immediately missed the Badlands. And she said she would be hiking with the dogs, and she would run into a fence, and it was a rancher's property, or she would come down to the river, and the river would kind of cut them off, and she just felt really restricted. And she missed the Badlands, and she came home and told Dan, I'm going to go back out to the Badlands. I think we'll be fine. And he disagreed, and they kind of argued about it, and there was not much he could do. She was determined to go. So she goes out there the next day, pulls in, do their routine. The dogs actually got out this time. Nothing happened. They had a nice walk. The dogs ran ahead. Daisy stayed by her side. They just had a great time. Came back and they did this again and again for about a week and a half. And she started to forget about the previous event that happened with the dogs acting really scared. So one particular day, it was early evening, early October, she was doing a routine with the dogs in the Badlands. She'd gone back there quite a ways, up over a few hills, down into this ravine, and then they were heading up another hill, heading for these red cliff walls. There was a small hill heading up, and Sweet Pea and Rowdy were running up this hill. Daisy was by her side, and they get near the top of this hill, and they both at the same time turned around and ran back down the hill right to Kelly. And they were right by her feet, and they were acting very afraid, and they were whimpering. And then immediately Daisy turned and looked up the hill and started growling. And again, she had this same vibe as the previous time that they were out there when the dogs were scared. So she, okay, let's go. She turned and was starting to head up this hill. And soon as she turned, Sweet Pea and Rowdy took off and disappeared. They were gone. They were heading back to the truck again. Daisy was doing everything she could to stay by her side. She went up this hill, down another hill, and then she got up this final hill, and she could look down towards the truck, and she could see the two dogs waiting right by the ford. Daisy was by her side. She was growling again. And then she whimpered, and then she took off as fast as she could run, and she ran down the hill to join the other two dogs. She essentially abandoned Kelly at the top of this hill. Kelly knew that this dog would give her life for her, so it was really strange for her to see this. And she had this immediate feeling of being creeped out, and just this feeling that something was watching her. Very common with Bigfoot encounters. So she's on the top of this hill, and she's looking to her left and looking around, and she looks to the south and then the west of her down this slope, and what she saw boggled her mind. At the bottom of this large hill, she saw this large creature, is what she called it, standing there staring at her. And she was at the top of the hill. And this thing was very dark. It looked like a black gorilla, except it was really lean, not really bulky. It had these very, very long arms. And it was very strange because it looked human-like and gorilla-like at the same time, and yet it was neither. And she's staring at this thing in shock. And all of a sudden, it starts to walk up the slope. But it had such long legs, and the stride was so long, it just took these 2 or 3 super long strides. And she said it was so smooth, it looked like a cloud just moving across the sky. And it was just effortless as it worked its way up this hill. She was so afraid, it just kicked in that she needed to run, and she turned and started running down this slope to the truck to get to the dogs and get out of there. As she's running down the hill, she almost fell because she was running so fast and it was so steep. She caught herself, ran up the next hill to the dogs where the truck was parked, opened up the back passenger side. It was an extended cab, and all 3 dogs jumped in. She slammed the door, and she ran around the back of the box of the truck. And before she got in the truck, she opened the door, and she looked over her right shoulder, and she could see this creature, this gorilla-like, very tall, dark figure coming down the slope. Not running, but it just had this glide to it. just this swinging these arms and just walking very purposefully down the hill. Now, what was bad about this was that Kelly normally would pull in and then she would back up a few times and then get the truck in position to head back down the hill to the bottom and then out to the highway and head back to town. But this particular time, for whatever reason, she pulled in and just left the truck parked uphill. And she didn't want to take the time to do this 3-point turnaround because she was so afraid that this creature was going to show up and she was going to like confront it at the same moment. And so she just started the truck up and just gunned it up this hill with this dirt road. And she'd never been on this dirt road before. It was very rutted, very rough road, and she was heading up towards the top of the Badlands and going as fast as she could up this road. And she looked in the rearview mirror and she didn't see this creature, but she knew she had to keep going and see if she could get away and get some space between her and this thing. The dogs are in the back seat acting like scared rabbits. She's bouncing up this road, going as fast as she can, and yet trying to keep it in control because she knew if she lost control and she slid off the road or got stuck somehow, she could be there for the night. And this would be a disaster based on what she had seen, which was so frightening for her. She goes about 2 miles, so her guess, working her way up this ridge, and she could see where the Badlands ended, and then there was pine trees, and then the Absaroka Mountains were back there. And then finally this road gets to this top and it crests out and it kind of levels out and it ends. And she realizes she's got to stop here and turn around. So she turns around, it's pretty tight, and she puts it in reverse, and as she puts it in reverse and she's going, she hits this rut with the front tires, and she kind of guns it to get out of the rut, and then she goes a little too far and she starts to go over the edge down into this steep slope. And she hits the brakes right at that moment, and she knows if she makes a mistake it could be fatal for her. So she's just sitting there like this with the ruts under the front tires of the truck, and she went just over the edge by 2 feet on the back, and she's sitting like this with the dogs in the back. And then she calmly, with her heart beating like a rabbit, puts it into 4-wheel drive, takes a deep breath, and then gives it some gas and bounces over the rut and peels out of the dirt and swings the wheel and turns just before she goes over the edge on the other side. And then she stops the truck, assesses the situation. The dogs are now on the floor of the truck. She can see it's starting to get dark. She knows she has to get out of there, and she knows the only way out is to go back down this hill. So she starts creeping the truck slowly down the mountain again. She's working her way down this dirt road, going pretty slow, and she's scanning left and right and just looking for anything. She doesn't want to come upon this thing suddenly. She's thinking at one moment that she could drive off into the scrub oak and just kind of get buried in there and kind of hide from this thing, but then she thought that could be suicide and she would end up spending the night up there. That would be a terrible idea. So she continued down this road, goes around this curve, drops down, it levels out, and there's more scrub oak, and she sees across the road this tree, and it wasn't there when she went up, and it was an aspen tree, and there was some aspens down there mixed in with the scrub oak, and she knew this was a survival situation. This thing had bad intentions for her and the dogs. She looked around, she didn't see anything. She hit the gas pedal, and because she's got good clearance, she felt confident that she could clear this thing, so she bounced over this aspen tree and got on the other side, and she could hear it cracking and breaking under the truck. As she's driving over this thing, she looks over to her right and she sees this shape in the scrub oak standing there, and she just sees it just for a moment. And as she turns her head out of the corner of her eye, she sees something come flying out of the trees and the brush there. She hears this loud bang on the back of the truck, back quarter panel, behind the back wheel on the box. And she guns it. And she realized that she'd gone any slower over this aspen tree, that whatever this thing threw could have came through the passenger side window. She's now going down this road, heading for the bottom of the Badlands so she can get out of there, going as fast as she can, and yet trying to stay on the road and not just slide off, because when you're on a gravel road and you go too fast, you can just slide right off and you just roll into the ditch. It's terrible. And she felt such fear that she continued to go as fast as she could and yet try to keep it under control. She finally got down to the bottom of the Badlands, took the dirt road up to the highway, took a right, and went back to town. Kelly got back to Dubois, got home, opened up the garage door, let the dogs out, got them in the house, got the garage door shut. The dogs immediately went down the hallway to one of the bedrooms and went under the bed. They were still really scared as well. Kelly was really shaken up by this, and she had this strange feeling that this thing could have possibly followed her all the way home. She'd never experienced anything like this, so she didn't know what to believe anymore. She was really shaken up. She called her husband Dan at work, and he had just left because he was just completed a trip with some clients, and he was on his way home. So she was relieved about that. She waited for him. He came home, and she told him the whole story. He listened, and he just really felt kind of unsure about it, but he knew that she never lied or told stories. She wasn't a dramatic person. And so she took him out to the garage, and he saw the truck, and it had dirt in the wheel wells and dirt along the side, and then you could see this dent in the back of the truck. And he thought, okay, yeah, there's something happened, and my wife would never make something like this up. So he believed her that she saw something out in the Badlands. That night, she had a really hard time sleeping. In fact, she didn't really sleep at all. She got up the next morning. Dan had gotten up early, and he was calling some friends. They were going to go back out to the Badlands with guns and a couple of pickup trucks. And Kelly just begged him, please, don't go back out there. And he said, nope, it's fine. We just got to see what was happening, see what's going on. And so she had to let him go. She had a friend come over and spend the day with her because she was still shaken up by this. And she waited all day for him to come back. He finally came back that evening, and he said, we didn't see anything, but we found a few things. We found some footprints. Many of them were hard to see what they were doing, what they were, but you could tell they were these long footprints in the dirt. And then at the bottom of the hill, it leveled out, and he saw a few really clear footprints, these very long 15-inch, 7-inch wide footprints in the dirt. They went up the same road that Kelly had said she'd gone up, and they found the aspen tree that she'd driven over, and he said it had been pulled out by its roots by something very powerful. And she didn't see that as she drove over it. And he also found another smaller aspen tree that was about 6 inches round, and it had been twisted off the rest of the tree. It had been twisted out. And so they knew something was out there. So word had gotten around town that there was a Bigfoot sighting out at the Dubois Badlands. People are talking about this. Now, historically, there's been Bigfoot sightings in the Wind River Range, as well as the Absaroka Range to the north. The Shoshone people have stories in their history about the hairy man in that area. About 3 months later, beginning of the year, their lease was up. And Dan and Kelly, they made a decision together to move. And Dan liked the idea of not being there with what she had encountered and him possibly experiencing something like that in the Wind River Range. And so they moved down to Utah. He got a job guiding down there in the national forest down there and thought they'd be fine. And about a month later, Kelly talked to one of her friends, and she said there was another sighting down by the river of this thing. She didn't know the details. And this just confirmed to her that they made a good move to head to Utah. And that is our story about Kelly and Dan up in Wyoming. Okay, you guys, that is our story about Dan and Kelly in Wyoming. And that was a lot of fun. I got a little bit of a hike to get out of here, not too far to go, maybe a half a mile. So I better get to it. But I really appreciate you guys watching my channel and commenting and being part of what I'm doing here. I appreciate that and appreciate you. So, all right, we'll see you in the next one. As always, keep hiking.